Welcome everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay, so it's now 11, more than 11 now, 11:02. So we shall start the sessions now. So I'm Associate Professor Dr. Chiu. The head of English is 2 p.m. Okay, there are still more people. Azifa, can you try to add them while I'm organizing the session here? Okay, so this session is about appraising important papers, and importantly is to look from the perspective of methodology, and we try to actually understand a paper, and then only we want to try to apply it in our practice. Okay, so this session we call it a meta journal hour because it's conducted like a journal club, but we are actually giving emphasis on the methodology. So it's meta research, and we hope this can be covered over an hour. That the name become meta journal. Together, my CRU staff, Miss Iman, who is the research officer in the CRU, and she's the presenter for today's sessions. And she will actually try to bring us through this paper and how to actually understand it the way that we should understand any clinical research paper. Yeah. Okay. So we have Dr. Azifa with us. Dr. Azifa is the MO in the CRU, and I made her the co-host so that she can help us to organize this session to be better. And as you can see, this is done on the Zoom platform, not the webinar platform. So it's a Zoom meeting platform. So anyone and everyone can interact, and you can actually say or give comments or ask questions. Before that, I hope you can mute yourself, and if you have any comments or questions, you are more than welcome to unmute and then to say whatever you want to say. Maybe it's better also if you can make use of the next, or I can say you can not too somebody say it may overlap. Okay. Iman is very if more and we want to actually provide you with a CPD point as a sessions that we okay, right. So
Hi. Hi everyone. Good morning. Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes,
can.
Okay, so just for introduction, yes, I think I'm mute now.
You.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. So just for introduction, my name is Iman. I'm the research officer from CRU. So I will be conducting our today's session. So let's say in between our sessions, my line got disconnected, or my line is breaking, or you cannot hear me, or you cannot see my slide. You can just interrupt me in between. And I also welcome any feedback or any questions during our sessions. Okay. So this is the presentation outline for our sessions today. So we have 3 parts in which we aim to finish in 1 hour. So first we have the content of research article. We are going to discuss in details in terms of the study method. and also the results and also the findings of the studies. And then we are going to discuss on the key learning points of our session for today, and then we also open for Q&A and also discussion. So this is the article that we are going to discuss on today. So I would like to suggest that you have a copy of this article, or you can just open it in another tab, so you can actually refer to directly to the research article, although that we have provided slides to you later on. Okay, so this research article titled Interpreting Systematic Reviews, Are We Ready to Make Our Own Conclusions? A Cross-Sectional Study. So this is actually a local studies done by our clinicians in IMU, and it was done in 2011. So although that this paper was a little bit old, which is it was done around a decade ago, but there is no actually a similar studies that have been done in the past few years. So this is the abstract of the papers, in which that usually when we are reading a paper, we will read the abstract first. So as you can see that this article or this paper is about a study in which that they are assessing a group of Malaysian hospital practitioners as well as medical students, in which that whether they are able to draw their own conclusions from systematic reviews, and to what extent these were influenced by their prior belief and also the direction of the study results. So we will go through in details in terms of the study methods. So just a little bit on the background of the study. So first, as we all know, systematic reviews provides evidence-based answers, in which that it is analytic instruments that summarize the base available scientific evidence in order to provide evidence-based answers to clinically relevant questions. So usually healthcare practitioners, clinicians, and also pharmacists or even dietitian nurses will refer to systematic reviews, especially when there are some clinically relevant questions that would require them to find some clinical and also to make sound judgment. So in order to promote or in order to enhance systematic or evidence-based practice, so there have been some coordinated efforts to promote evidence-based practice in the recent years. So for example, there are many workshops that have been conducted in order to promote evidence-based practice among healthcare practitioners, and even in undergraduate students, we also have incorporated evidence-based practice or evidence-based medicine in their modules in their study years. And then even when we are looking at the pyramid of evidence, in the hierarchy pyramid of evidence, we can see that the randomized control trial, systematic reviews, and also meta-analysis are at the highest level. And also usually these type of studies would be mostly cited due to its high value in informing clinical decisions. And one of the database that we can find systematic reviews is in Cochrane Library, in which that in Cochrane Library, it is a collection of high quality independent evidence to inform healthcare decision making. However, in terms of interpreting systematic review itself, it is still not clear on how our current and also our future hospital practitioners on whether they are ready to practice evidence-based medicine by independently interpreting the clinical evidence. So that is the background of the study, in which that it arises these two research questions. So the authors of the papers has two research questions to address. First, given only the results of a set of Cochrane systematic reviews or SR, what proportion of hospital staff and also medical students would be able to generate the appropriate conclusions, in which they will not be given a full paper, they would only be given the results. So later on, we will see what kind of results or what kind of proportions of the tools that they are going to get, and also in terms of the direction of the systematic reviews. So are positive systematic reviews, in which that positive systematic reviews or a beneficial systematic reviews is more effective than negative SR, in which that SR that do not show a beneficial effect of the intervention in changing the reader's belief and also directing them to appropriate conclusion. So is there any effects of the direction of the SR itself? So to answer the research questions, the author highlighted the research objective is to assess how well a group of Malaysian hospital practitioners and medical students derive their own conclusion from systematic reviews, and to what extent these were influenced by their prior belief and the direction of the study results. So whenever we are reading research papers, so we have to actually have this some sort of kind of appraisal checklist in which that we want to see whether the papers is relevant to our practice or not. So in terms of this study, the checklist that we could ask ourselves is whether the aims of the study or whether the objective of the study adequately address research questions. So in terms of the comments, okay, so this objective, as we can compare with the research questions before, the objective of the study were actually in line and also adequate to answer research questions. So before we move on to our next section, so I would just want to ask whether we have any comments on the research objectives. You can actually give your opinions or whether you have suggestions on how the authors can actually improve their research objective. Any comments or any opinions?
For those who have just joined, you want to be clear about the PICO, yeah, the research questions of any research. So what is the P here? And we know that this is not an experimental study, so it's not the I that we're looking for, it's the E, it's exposure, the independent variable here. And then because it's non-experimental study, so there's no C, but there's O. So what are the outcomes here that the study is going to measure? So you want to keep in mind in mind of what is the P, what is the E, and what's the O here. And then you need to assess how they select their P and how they prepare their exposure and then how they measure their outcomes for us to actually be able to understand how that study has been conducted and how much the findings we want to believe in. I hope these are clear. My connection is good enough to convey my voices. Am I still frozen and broken up?
No, we can hear you clearly, Prof.
Okay, good.
Okay.
If there's a comment, then you can proceed.
Okay. So from Prof. Chu's comment, in which that in terms of research questions and research objective, we have to determine the PICO, the PICO. So in this study, the population involved the hospital practitioners as well as the medical students. And then since there is no intervention, but there is an exposure in which that the exposure would be the SR. And also the outcome that they want to see is whether they are able to derive their own conclusions. So that would be the P, E, and also O of the study. Okay, so moving on to the materials and method of the study. So this study utilized cross-sectional using convenient sampling design. And in terms of the participants and settings, so there are two groups of target. First is hospital practitioners from Hospital Tuanku Jaafar Seremban, recruited during an introductory course on EBM, comprised of clinicians and also allied health staff. So they have two groups of hospital practitioners. One is clinicians and another one is AHS. And this AHS, including nurses, they had physiotherapists, pharmacists, nutritionists, also laboratory technicians. And the other group was final year medical students from IMU. And these students have also received a structured and also clinically integrated EBM training program in their final year curriculum. So these are some of the checklists that we can go through when you are reading materials and methods or the methodology of our research papers. So first, in terms of the study design, so whether the study design is appropriate for the stated objective. So since the data collection and also there is no interventional involved in this study, so this study design, which is the cross-sectional study, is adequate or is appropriate for this set objective and also to answer the research questions. And then in terms of the sample size, some journal publishers may also require you to justify in terms of what are the calculations that you use to calculate your sample size calculations. However, for this study, there was no mention of sample size calculation for each target group, especially when you have different target groups, we have to actually justify the calculation for each target group. And in terms of the sample size selections, in which that they are using the convenient sampling, which is the non-probability sampling, so it can lead to the lack of generalizability of convenient sampling, which actually may not be reflective of target populations because they only selected those samples that is convenient to the researchers. And then in terms of the selection criteria will also is also important in terms of writing or reading a research paper or critically appraising a research paper. And for this study, there was also no mention of inclusion and exclusion criteria stated by the authors other than the participants and also the settings that is stated on the research papers. So do you have any comments on this part?
You can proceed, Iman.
Okay. Okay, so in terms of study instruments, so this study utilized questionnaires in terms of the study instrument in which that they distributed Cochrane SR abstract as their reading materials and also the answer sheet in which that their participant will answer or will give their conclusions on that answer sheet. And then in terms of the statistical analysis, it is quite straightforward in which that the authors use cross-tab using chi-square to compare differences in addition to the statistic using SPSS. And this study was approved by the CRC of HTJ and also the ethics committee of IMU. So this is how the authors actually select Cochrane SR abstract before they handed out the abstract to the participants. So as you can see on that flow on the flow chart on the screen, so the first author initially selected 30 potentially suitable SR identified in the Cochrane library in 2008, and then another two authors shortlisted from that 30 to 9 SR, and then finally all three authors actually selected final 4 SR through voting and discussion. So how did they actually select their own SRs? So these are the criteria. First is the direction of summary of effects, whether the SR has clear direction, whether it is a positive or negative direction, the spread of disciplines, the clarity of the results, the likelihood of familiarity to the participants, as well as the strength of evidence, whether it is sufficient or limited evidence. So they actually selected their SRs carefully before they handed out to the to the participants. So as you can see, these are the finalized SR selected. So these are all from four different disciplines. So we have SR1, 2, 3, and 4. So just bear in mind that SR1 and also SR3 is a positive direction SR. Okay, and then SR2 and SR4 is the negative direction SR. So they purposely selected different directions of SR to see whether these different directions of SR would influence the conclusions or not, or the ability to interpret conclusions or not. So in this study, the authors actually trimmed the SR abstract to only the background, objective, and main results, and deleted the author's conclusion and also other standardized and also technical parts such as the search strategy, selection criteria, data collection, and also analysis. So how did they do this? So from that full version of SR abstract, they actually copy and pasted the whole thing, but only included the stated or the important part, which is the background, objective, and also main results, and they also deleted the unwanted parts. So the participant would only get the background, objective, main results together with one treatment outcome combination and included the corresponding forest plot with the abstract. So just bear in mind that those participants of the study did not get the author's conclusions. They only get the trim abstract together with the forest plot. Okay, and then when the participants were given the trim abstract, they were asked to draw their own conclusions on the highlighted treatment outcome combination by choosing only one of the following 6 options of different combinations of direction of effects and also strength of evidence. So as you can see on the screen, option number 1 is whether the systematic reviews abstract is clearly beneficial and also should be recommended as a possible treatment. Option B, clearly non-beneficial and should not be recommended. Option C, appears to be beneficial from limited evidence. Option D, appears to be non-beneficial. Option E, there is insufficient evidence to comment on whether this intervention is beneficial. And the last option is, I do not understand the results presented. So two authors independently actually determine the most appropriate conclusion for each systematic reviews. And in terms of determining the appropriate conclusion for each SR, they actually refers to the review's author's conclusions as their own reference standard rather than constructing their own conclusions, because the author's conclusion from the review itself were considered sufficiently robust, and also they have gone through several rounds of peer and also editorial reviews before being published. So I just want to ask whether any of you have any opinions that whether these options sufficiently address the research objective, which is to assess whether they are able to draw their own conclusions or not. Any ideas or any suggestions?
Sorry, hello.
Yes.
I'm Isra from Serdang. I just want to ask if let's say the participant chose the answer F, okay, will this affect the result? Because they simply don't understand. So how can they drive to the conclusion? It is benefit or not?
Yes. So thank you for your questions. So if you can see through the article itself, they actually did not report how many participants actually reported these findings, which is do not understand the results presented. So we wouldn't also not very sure on what happened to this to the participant who chose these following options, because the authors itself do not really report on what happened to the participant who chose these options. Okay, so this is the answer sheet that were given to the participant, in which that other than the conclusions, the participants were asked whether they are from which discipline or department, and also they also received the following 3 questionnaire items for each systematic reviews. So the first question is whether they have seen or whether they have heard the review. So they were given option yes or no. And then will the review author's conclusion help you making your own conclusions, yes or no? And there are the next following questions. What is the belief on the intervention prior to reading the reviews? So whether their beliefs before the reading the review, whether they believe that the intervention is beneficial, whether they do not believe that the intervention is beneficial, and whether they are unsure. So the 3 categories, which is appropriate belief, is when their belief is in line with the direction of the actual SR results. And when they have inappropriate belief is when their belief is against the direction of the actual SR results, and also whether they are unsure of their own belief prior to reading to the SRs. So this is in terms of the assessing of the beliefs of the intervention itself. Okay, so some of the checklists that we could ask ourselves when we are reading or when we are appraising a research article is whether the variables measured using appropriate tool. So since this study is quite straightforward, in which that they are only assessing their ability, so they are only using questionnaires. But then in terms of the diagnostic, or in terms of a therapeutic studies, or in terms of clinical trials, so we could actually appraise more whether they are measured or whether their tools is appropriate to the intended measure or to the intended outcomes or not. Okay, and then in terms of the validation, whether the measurement or measurement tool validated, well known, and also accepted. So in this study, it was noticed that the measurement tool, which is both the Cochrane SR abstract and also in terms of the questionnaire items, in terms of the answer sheet, was not validated. So even the authors itself also suggested that prior to the study, they should actually done a validation or at least a pilot study prior to the conduct of the study. Okay, any comment on this section or in this part?
Can I just ask? I'm Cecilia from Serdang. The
Yes.
measurement tool is the questionnaire, is it?
Yes, the questionnaire.
So how do we validate that?
So in terms of the questionnaire, in terms of validation, we have several methods of validation, whether it is a content validation or whether it is a face validation. So in terms of the content validation, we want to validate whether our content of the questionnaire really can answer our research questions or research objective. And in terms of the face validation is whether we want to see whether our subject or whether our participant would be able to understand our study or not. So that would be a validation study lah. Sometimes in terms of a questionnaire, especially when it is a self-developed questionnaire, it would require validations. But if it is a questionnaire that has been developed and it has been developed by other peoples and only we utilize in our study, we would not require further validation. It depends on what type of questionnaires that you are going to use, and also it depends on what types of a population. So for example, we are using a questionnaire that has been developed overseas, but then we want to do it in our country and it has not been done in our population. So that one requires validation.
In this context of the questionnaire to ask whether you understand the systemic review, so how do you validate this?
For this study itself, the authors did not do any validation to their questionnaires for this study. So I think in my own opinion, in my own personal opinion, in terms of the validation for this study, they could probably only do a face validation in which they only need to make sure that their participant can understand what the question is intended to measure. That is my own opinion. Prof. Chu, do you have any other additional opinions on this validation or pilot study for this study?
Yeah. I mean, I say sorry. Yeah. Of distinctive responses for the participants, which I think is likely to be believable and validated in that sense, but we can't be very 100% sure unless they do something what we call as validation, at least to the face and content perspective, prospect of the questions or the options, because knowing that they have non-clinicians participants, allied health, and also medical students. So we are not sure whether these answer sheets are only available in English, and we're not sure about English proficiency of the other participants. Yeah, so am I clear? Yeah, so the answer sheet are likely not like the usual questionnaire that we use to measure certain construct. The answer sheet has to be good enough what the intended answer sheet, they should be able to understand and provide their response accordingly. So the validation here is not actually like applicable to the usual questionnaire that to measure certain construct as a whole. Yeah, so the validation here is whether they have proven the answer sheet is could be answered by the participants. So in this study.
Okay, any additional comments? Yeah.
Actually, judge is it or
Prof. Chiu, I think your line is breaking.
no, I know. Put in the chat box, yeah.
Okay, any other comments on this section, on this part? Okay, so we will proceed to the next slide. So this is basically the overall overview of the conduct of the study. So as the authors or the researchers had two groups, they had hospital practitioners as well as medical students. So the data collection for hospital practitioners was done during the midway of evidence-based medicine course. And the medical students, it was done during the midway of final 6 months of undergraduate medical training, because during the final year or during the final semester is where they receive their EBM module or EBM course. So for hospital practitioners, they are being given 5 minutes to reach each SR abstract, in which that the abstract was projected on the screen. But then for medical students, the 5 minutes given to read each printed systematic review abstract, in which that they were being given a hard copy of the SR abstract. So the completion of anonymous answer script as consent to participate in the study. So in general, the conduct of the study, although that the participants were given same 5 minutes of duration to reach each SR abstract, but in my opinion, in my own personal opinion, that I think that they should actually standardize it. And then there was also no mention of how they actually conducted it, whether it is in the exam rooms, whether they are not allowed to actually see each other's answers. So they don't really mention it, but then the authors did mention that the participants were not allowed to communicate with each other. Okay, any suggestions or any comments on this part? Okay, so that is basically on the method of the study. So we will move on to our results section. So before we move on to our results section, it is important for us to actually know the method of the study, because the method of the study itself, or the method of the articles itself, would actually determine how valid or how applicable or how relevant is the study to be applied in our practice. So that is why in terms of appraising a research or appraising a research article, it is important for us to actually look the methods in a detailed manner, in which that we have to actually appraise the methods more than the other sections before we move on, before we look at the results. Because if the method is not valid, if the methods is not really applicable, so the result would not mean anything. Okay, so if there is no more issues on the method, so we will proceed for the results sections. So in terms of the background of the participants, the authors only provided the numbers of the total participants with the breakdown. Okay, so initially a total of 185 participants were approached, including 150 hospital practitioners and also 35 medical students. So among that 185, there were a total of a final 130 participants, in which that among that 130, 95 was the hospital practitioners, in which that 44 are clinicians and 51 are allied health staff, and also all medical students, which is 35 medical students participated in the study. So each participant read through 4 Cochrane abstracts, adding up to total 520 encounters, because 130 times with 4 abstracts, so we get 520 encounters. However, there were no other data such as the background data, such as the years of experience, the educational background. So I think that one is one of the most important data that the authors should actually report in this background of the participants. Okay, any other comments or suggestions that what would be other important data that could be included in this background of participants? Do you think that a different background of participants or different field of practice or different years of experience would make a difference? Do you have any ideas or any suggestions?
Yeah, I think it would be important to mention the years of experience. It would make a difference to the results.
Yes, yes, agreed. In terms of years of experience, the disciplines, and also the education background as well. Okay, so we proceed with answering the research objective. So first is to answer the ability to identify the most appropriate conclusion. So first we look at this figure in which that they have 4 bar graphs here. So overall is the overall appropriate conclusions for all systematic reviews, and this is the separate systematic reviews independently. So as we can see, in overall, only 30.1% of the participants were able to determine the most appropriate conclusion with the appropriate direction. And when we are looking at different systematic reviews independently or differently, systematic review 1 and systematic review 3 has higher number of participants who are able to determine the most appropriate conclusions compared with SR2 and also SR4. So as you can recall, SR1 and also SR3 has or is the positive SR, and SR2 and SR4 is the negative SR. So as you can see here, more participants were able to identify the most appropriate conclusions when they are reading positive SR. And when you're looking at the point here, more medical students, which is 48.2%, and hospital practitioners identified the most appropriate conclusions, which is it is a p-value of less than 0.05. Okay, and then in terms of the encounters, in 20.9 encounters, the participants indicated that they had seen or heard the SR before, but then although that they had seen or heard the SR, but they were not more likely to identify the most appropriate conclusion than those who reported having no prior impression of the SRs. So the authors reported that more medical students were actually able to identify the most appropriate conclusions compared with hospital practitioners, because they are just learning, or they are just taking the EBM course during their final year undergraduate studies. So that is what is stated by the authors here. Okay, any comments on these results? Although that they stated actually medical students had reported more numbers of determining the most appropriate conclusions, but if you look at the article, there is no actually data. They only stated this as a sentence or as a statement, but there is no actually a breakdown of data in terms of this overall, or in terms of this each of these SR. How many medical students or how many hospital practitioners, clinicians or allied health staff were actually able to identify the most appropriate conclusions. So they actually combine the data all together here. So I think in my personal opinions, or in future studies, we could actually have a separate section for different background, or for different type of participants, instead of just combining with everything here. So what do you think? Do you have any suggestions or any ideas from the floor? Prof. Chu, do you agree with me?
Oh, yes. So bear in mind of the P here, and the title of the study is actually, are we ready, you see? So this we, to the researcher, they are grouping all these 3 categories of participants in together. So we can interpret the result knowing these 3 categories of participants all together. Health, hospital practitioners, which could be clinical specialists, consultants, and allied health staff. This could be pharmacists, could be occupational therapists, could be nurses, could be MA, I don't know. Yeah, they never report who they are, and also the medical students. So I think some of you would agree that this is a bit a wide variety of health staff, and the meanings of the result have been much reduced because they are all being grouped together. I think we would actually want to see on different group of the healthcare providers, because you know the tools, the exposure they use, the titles of the systematic review used as a tool to measure the interpretation skill are actually very much clinical topics and issues. Yeah, although it may not be relevant, directly relevant, so long that you have the ability to read systematic review, ability to read the pool analysis and meta-analysis, ability to read forest plot. So by right, anyone should be able to understand and to reach the right conclusion. That's the presumption. That's a presupposition of the research here. Yeah, but I think in way of reporting, we may want to see a more detailed breakdown of the participants, because knowing that they are distinctly different from each other. Yeah, so bear that in mind. So you need to interpret the result as a whole for the whole these participants.
Okay, so moving on to our next objective, which is to assess the influence of prior belief on the post-reading conclusions. So out of 489 encounters, 41% of participants' prior belief were in line with the appropriate conclusion, which means that they have the correct beliefs together with the appropriate conclusions. And then around 30% went against the appropriate conclusions, in which that their conclusions were not in line with their prior belief, and 28% were unsure about the effect of the intervention prior to reading systematic review. And after reading the systematic review, almost half of the participants, which is around 47%, who had inappropriate belief, prior belief, choose the appropriate conclusion, which means that although that before they read the systematic review, they had the inappropriate prior belief, but when they have read the abstract, they actually chose the appropriate conclusions. And around 19.2% who had appropriate prior belief chose inappropriate conclusion, in which that although that they had appropriate prior belief, but then after they read the systematic reviews, they chose the inappropriate conclusions. Okay, so this is where we would like to see the influence of positive and negative SR on participants' post-reading conclusions. So first, I would like to highlight on the positive SR, which is the SR1 and also SR3. So as you can see, almost half of the participant, which is more than half of the participant, around 64% of participants who previously had inappropriate prior belief, and 59.5% who were unsure, chose the appropriate conclusion after reading positive SR, which means that although that they are unsure or whether they had inappropriate belief, they tend to choose appropriate conclusions when they are reading positive SR, as compared with negative SR. Previously, when they had inappropriate prior belief or when they were unsure, they chose the inappropriate conclusion after reading the negative SR. So this we can see that the direction of the SR itself can actually influence whether the participants can actually choose or can draw their own appropriate conclusions or not. So this is the key findings, in which that those who read a positive SR were likely to choose appropriate conclusion compared when reading negative SR, and then those who had appropriate prior belief chose inappropriate conclusions after reading negative SR, then positive SR. So this is how the direction of the SR itself can actually influence the conclusions of the SRs. In terms of the perceptions of the values of the author's conclusions, okay, because these participants did not receive the portion of author's conclusions, only the result portions. So more than half of the participants indicated that author's conclusion is, if available, would have helped them to draw their own conclusions. But then interestingly, more of them identified the most appropriate conclusion compared to those who considered author's conclusion unnecessary, although the differences actually did not reach any statistical significance, which means that although they value the author's conclusion, they are able to actually draw their own appropriate conclusions, compared with those who don't really value author's conclusion. They are actually not able to draw their own appropriate conclusions. Okay. If you read the statement on the research article itself, the sentence is a bit confusing, but it is what it meant lah. Okay. Any comments on this section? Okay, so that is on the result section. So we proceed with the discussion. So this is the discussion that is extracted.
Can I say something? In the result there's a proportion reported for people who did not understand. Your figure previously, yeah. Just now we were talking about they did not report on the percentage who did not understand, but it seems like there is some reporting here.
What's the proportion?
33.3%, is it? The top layer?
The top layer. So it's
Okay.
5, is it?
This figure, right?
No, actually the figures number, the second figures.
This table 1, is it table 1?
Iman, the second figures, there are just 2 bar charts. The uppermost light gray.
Okay. Okay.
So apparently there are 5 of them. So
Mm.
can you confirm that this is those who do not understand?
But I think this one is referring to the belief. The unsure is, it's okay, I will confirm it later. Okay. Whether it is
This is-
referring to the beliefs or the responses.
This has been stratified according to positive or negative reviews.
Mm.
We are not sure whether they have excluded those who are actually not answering positive or negative review here. Because it's reported here only 5. They have not reported the original responses to I do not understand. If you look at the answer sheet, the one that we were asking about, I do not understand, right, is the one, the option F.
Mm.
And coming to here, whether it's appropriate or appropriate, it looks like it's a second answer sheet, second part answer sheet. And they have stratified it according to positive or negative reviews and whether it's appropriate and inappropriate. Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be part of it,
Okay.
Yeah. But we're not sure whether this is the whole part of the option F.
Prof. Chu, even in figure 1, also it is been reported the proportion of participants who did not understand the result.
There are. The last one, right? Okay.
Yeah. The last, yes.
Yes, I mean the legend of the graph also, the bar chart, by right is supposed to be following the Romans numbering 1 to 5, isn't it? But in the footnotes, actually A to E.
That's
Okay,
right.
so and it's given, it's given that the percentages, and we are not sure again whether these percentages and the total number of it, so we cannot verify whether this is the whole number.
And then I think in the conclusion responses, there are 6 options, but then the bar graph only showed 5 responses, 1 until 5. There are supposed to be 6, A until F. Right?
So we may assume or we may estimate the proportions of those who do not understand the result at all could be around 10%, isn't it? If you plus minus here and there, it may not be, I don't think it will be run too far off. So it's about 10%, but we cannot be exactly sure what is the actual proportions from the incomplete reporting of the paper.
So actually, if you look at figure 1, you're supposed to have 6 division, right? There's only 5.
Yes, there's only 5.
What is missing actually?
No,
Which
I can
answer
only
is
guess,
missing?
Yeah, if you read the footnote, they give some indications as what is dark, what is indicated in the shaded in black, which is A, and which is shaded in dark gray, which is B, and then which is shaded in gray, and then there's C, and then shaded in gray again, which is D, and then lastly the E1 shaded in gray also. So we can only assume this is following like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and A, B, C, D, E. And which is the one that's not reported is not reported. So I'm not sure whether we should assume also the overall is 520 or 130. Because it's not clearly stated there, what's the total N, isn't it? For each of the, this is 100% bar chart. So for overall, we're not sure whether this is deriving from 520 encounters or based on the 130 participants. So it's not actually clear. So the bar chart itself is not self-explanatory. So there will be a lot of assumptions and estimations or from our part as a reader.
Yes.
So for us, the lesson is whenever we report a graph or a chart, make sure it's self-explanatory. Yeah. And the footnote has to be correct. I suppose it's supposed to be A, instead of A should be Roman 1, that kind of thing. So when you compare figure 1 and figure 2, we thought the do not understand is about 10%, but you come to figure 2, it's just about 3-4%. So we really do not know how many, what's the proportion of those who really do not understand at all. Which is the worst, isn't it, of the groups? But we do not know. And there's figure 3, and there's figure 3. So figure 3 will give you like almost like 30% those who don't understand. So again, this is not, we do not know the denominator. So it's very hard for us to understand the real proportions. So for every proportion, you need beside the numerator, we need to know the denominator, because otherwise the proportion is highly or hugely affected. Yeah, like say it's already stratified to positive and negative. We don't know the number, the total number. So the proportion will be, not meaningful without knowing that. Okay. So let's see what's the discussion point and then take home message, and then we can wrap up the whole thing. How the paper should be reported, and how should the research be conducted, or how should we conduct a new one if you are interested to go into similar area, and how should we plan and do a better one. Okay, so I think Iman can continue.
Okay, so for the discussion section for this article, so this one is I extracted from the article itself. So first, the author highlighted on the EBM skills, in which that they can see that, or they reported that the lack of evidence-based medicine skills among hospital practitioners can cause lower numbers. Around 30% of them could actually interpret the SR correctly or appropriately, and because of more students can actually determine or actually draw their own appropriate conclusion. So they also reported that early EBM training exposure is proven to be effective due to higher number of medical students who are able to interpret SR appropriately. And then second one is on the direction of the SR. So lack of EBM skills also led to inappropriate interpretation, especially for negative studies, because as you can see that more participants were able to determine the most appropriate conclusions for positive SR compared with negative SR. And lastly, in terms of the author's conclusion itself, because the participants in this study did not receive or did not get the portion of author's conclusions. So author's conclusions might be helpful in terms of interpreting the findings, especially among those with various backgrounds, especially when we had different type of practices or different types of disciplines and also practitioners in terms of referring to SRs. So what are the strengths and limitations of the study? So a decade ago, so this was actually the first study to examine the ability of end users, which is the medical students and also hospital practitioners in interpreting SR with different directions. And in terms of the limitations of the study, they had two limitations in terms of the methods and also applicability. First, in terms of the methods, as we discussed before, in terms of the questionnaire, they could have piloted or validated their questionnaires item, and also in terms of the methods of SR distribution, because the hospital practitioners read it on a projected screen, but then the students got it in terms of the printed form, so there could be some kind of difference or some kinds of effects of the interpreting of the SR itself, although that the time given is same. And also questionnaire item assessing prior belief were asked at the same time of reading the SR, because the participant were asked their prior belief at the same time when they are reading the SR. So for suggestion, when we are asking about something about prior belief, we should have, or the author should have asked it before the participants got the copies or reading the SR itself. And then in terms of perceptions of effect size and also estimates, because this group of participants, they also got a forest plot. So they may have different interpretations of interpreting effect size and estimates, especially in terms of making clinical judgment. And lastly, small number of SR also may also have limited generalizability of the findings, because we have they only have 4 types of 4 SRs and also different background of participants. And in terms of the applicability of the study, the participants of the study had different exposure and also skills of EBM, because we did not know whether the participants, whether the hospital or whether the clinicians or whether the allied health staff has previously attended EBM skills, or whether it is their first time attending the EBM workshop. So we did not know. Okay, and then because of the small number of sample size, so we cannot generalize the findings of the study to all hospital practitioners or even to medical students. And also there were also differences or changes in presentation format of Cochrane SRs. So not only Cochrane SRs, even different systematic reviews also have different formats. So this may not be applicable when interpreting other types of SRs. And as for the conclusions of the study,
Maybe hold on there for a while. Yeah. So remember the first statement they made, that students were found to be having a better skill. It's like double, 17% compared to healthcare practitioners, hospital specialists, all that. It's just about 20-something%. So here there's a different methods. So whether is comparable. So it's up for us to judge. Having the different methods of posing the SR abstract. So this itself could be a confounding factors or effect modifier. We don't know. So when the authors make the comparison, as a readers, when you judge it, you want to have this consideration in mind. Could the different methods in applying the tools, exposure to the participants, could have certain effects on the outcome or not? So it's not comparable here. They may actually say it's comparable, but it's definitely different methods, isn't it? So you need to keep that in mind. The effects, the doubles, the almost double medical students who are able to judge the conclusions correctly, they were actually exposed to different ways of assessment. Yeah. So it's up to you to judge whether looking the abstract on the screen projector or is it on the paper, which one is more conducive, or could it be negligible effect? Yeah, I think some may not think there's a negligible effect. Having the paper form probably easier to follow rather than looking at the projector. I don't know. Or after a certain period of time, whether they change the screen and they take away the paper, or they keep the paper altogether for the medical student, so they have time to flip through and go back and compare. By projecting on the screen, they may not be able to compare and go back, isn't it? So they can only show one abstract and then it's off. Then the second one. So I think that could be a substantial significant effect in having the different exposure. Do you agree? Okay, yeah, bear that in mind.
Agree.
Okay, so next one, I think we will come to the conclusions.
So as for the conclusion of the study, so this study has shown that a group of current and also future healthcare practitioners in Malaysia had difficulties in generating their own appropriate conclusion from SR independently. So this study actually has two key points. First is in terms of interpreting systematic reviews, and the other point is in terms of the writing conclusions. So judicious direction of authors in their conclusion is crucial in guiding our healthcare practitioners in identifying appropriate message from research. So whenever you are writing a systematic reviews, or whenever we are writing a research paper, so we have to ensure that our conclusion of a paper is appropriate and supported by the study data. So it should not be overestimated, or it should not be underestimated, because most of healthcare practitioners will also look at the conclusion proportion as well. And in terms of suggestion, further work is also needed to explore how factors such as prior belief and also the direction of the study results can influence the interpretation of clinical data. So these are some of the take-home message. So message number one, so as this study was done in 2011, which is a decade ago, so we can see that a large proportion of healthcare practitioners, around 70%, were not able to interpret SR findings appropriately. So has this situation changed? Now, because now we have already moved on with a lot of workshops in terms of EBM, in terms of interpreting clinical research to clinical practice. Okay, so this is one of the research gap that we can actually address. Okay, and then for the message number two, EBM and also critical appraisal skills are also needed to translate research findings. So it's not only about reading research articles, it's also to appraise research articles. And also the last message is critical appraisal checklist can also be helpful in guiding such clinical decision based on systematic reviews. So that is the take-home message for our today's sessions. So now we open for Q&A and also if you have any discussions.
Thank you, Iman. Maybe Iman, can you show the figure one again? I think the main message from this paper, if there's any that we can take away, will be the figure one, you know. But bearing in mind the P, the populations, and the slight different exposure between the different groups, and we also not knowing their backgrounds, if you can enlarge this a bit, Iman. Okay, so also show the footnote. Okay, this graph, this bar chart showing us the black one is the people who are able to judge the systematic review conclusion correctly in both direction and strength. Direction meaning whether it's beneficial or harm, or non-beneficial or non-harm lah. So direction is here or there. And also the strength of evidence. The evidence could be poor, good, moderate, or very good, isn't it? So the conclusion of the systematic review in abstract, they always, these two go together. Whether there's the direction is good, strong or not strong, and then whether the evidence is good or not good. The evidence, when the strength of evidence is judged as good, meaning to say the findings, the pooled analysis can be said is final. Do not need to repeat anymore, which is very rare in clinical research nowadays. Yeah, so most likely we are seeing like moderate or poor or very poor. So when the strength of evidence is judged as poor or very poor, it means that further research are needed. So here you see the black one, the lowest most part of the bar are those who are able to judge both correctly, direction and strength of evidence, without having the author's conclusion. If they have the author's conclusion, it's very straightforward, they tell you so. But in this study, the participants are only given the result and the force plot, remember, of one outcome. So if you look at this, it's about 1/4 to 1/3 were able to judge systematic review correctly in both direction and strength of evidence. Yeah, so the second bar chart is able to judge the direction correctly, but not able to judge the strength of evidence. Yeah, so you can see the third part of the bar chart will be those who are not able to judge the evidence correctly. So you can see the weakest point here is an inability to judge the strength of evidence. So maybe the categories of strength of evidence, very poor, poor, moderate, and good, is something maybe very abstract to many healthcare providers. Yeah. So, and from the positive side, you can see that almost 60% are able to judge the direction of systematic review. So probably it's not too difficult to read. This is clearly beneficial, or this is clearly non-beneficial or harmful. But whether they understand or not, this effect size, whether it's beneficial or harms, could be believed or not. How strong you can believe it, and whether it's conclusive or whether have to wait for further research. These are not very good. So this figure 1, I think, is the take home for this from this paper. And also between the positive result and negative result, it seems that the positive systematic reviews are easier to be interpreted compared to systematic review that return with negative, harmful treatment or non-beneficial programs seem to be less able to be understood by the healthcare providers. So we don't know why, yeah, maybe we were brought out in such a way that we always believe that treatments and programs should be beneficial. When we are presented with treatments or programs which were not beneficial, we probably probably a shock or surprise, or don't believe it, or in denial. Yeah, then you can't actually take the interpret the conclusions correctly. Yeah, so I think we would want to be more careful when you read systematic review with negative findings or harmful treatments or programs or non-beneficial one. Also pay more attention to the judgment of the strength of evidence. Yeah, if you need to improve your interpretation skill on systematic review, maybe you want to read out how to judge, how to interpret strength of evidence. What does it mean? Yeah. Okay. I think we have come to the end of the sessions. So we probably would like to hear any last burning comments or opinions. While waiting for you, we will pause for 1 minute while I will ask my staff to post some announcement for you with regards to getting your feedback. I mean, written feedback if you have something to tell us about these sessions that we can improve on. Also, we do have, is Azifa or Intan here? You want to show the attendance so that we can provide you with a CPD point by recording attendance?
Yes. Okay. You can see the QR code, right? Okay. So this one is for MMA attendance.
So you must have MMA apps and open it up and scan from there, isn't it? So meanwhile, if you have comments, you can still say about it. Okay, I can see in the chat, there's also a link for you to give us your feedback. Iman, please announce on the next MJH papers that we are going to discuss. So for those who have joined us today, if you are still interested to join us next month on appraising another paper, we have actually decided on the next paper to appraise.
So our next session would be on Friday, October 15, same time, 11 a.m. And we are going to discuss on the paper on ultra-processed food consumption and also risk of type 2 diabetes patients among participants of a large prospective cohort study. So for the link of the paper, I will share with you together with the link of the session.
I can see the tab. Can you show the paper to them? If there's a paper there. Is that the paper? I think your MA apps might be very difficult to open up and scan the QR code. Please use the link in the chat box to record your attendance. And also there's a link for you to give us your feedback. Iman, is it easier to get to the paper?
Yes.
Okay. And I think we try to actually keep you informed of CRU's activity. If you are interested, you may actually join there's a social media. Okay, maybe we'll come to that later. Okay, yeah. So this will be the paper that next we are going to appraise. If you know this NutriNet Sante prospective cohort study is said to be the largest cohort in nutritional study so far. Yeah. So they have this was one of the important paper that we want to appraise and see what they have to say about us, our nutritional habits and behavior, and see how good is the study, the cohort being conducted. Okay, so keep an eye to our next MGH. We would likely to also send out the poster, like the one that we have just done. Okay. Okay, we have one suggestion comment here. With reference to clinical appraisal workshop, are there any paper articles that have tested the effectiveness of such approach improving clinician appraisal skills? Okay, good questions. Okay, we'll try to look for that. See, I mean, we are actually in the midst of, CRU is in the midst of coming up with, what should I say, interventional program to improve high quality research among the clinicians. So we are looking through the literature. Yeah, thank you for the comments and suggestions. We definitely will give priority to papers that inform us as what could be the way or methods, approaches, strategies that we can use to improve clinicians' research skill or diagnostic skills or clinical skills. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you, Ahmad Ibmer Nasrik. Okay, so right, I think is there a Twitter or social media for CRU that people can follow us?
Yes, Prof. We have pasted the link on the chat box. So you can
is that okay? The Facebook.
Yes, YouTube and Facebook.
Okay, right. So you are feel free to follow us on Facebook. I think this is something new or quite for some times. I personally just get to know this as well, so I will just also follow the Facebook from today. So keep us, feel free to follow the Facebook. We will post interesting knowledge or skills, or even about our activity on the Facebook lah. We will now get to use it more often. Okay, right. So feel free to leave once you are done with scanning the QR code or getting the necessary information from here. And thank you very much for joining us. I hope this has been insightful and informative to you, and hope it will help. Your comments are welcome, and we'll actually keep always improving on the ways we conduct these sessions. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and have a good weekend.